Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Rage on the Range by Johnny Gunn. Narrated by P.J. Ochlan. Forward. This novel is based on an actual act of criminal behavior in which the criminal won the day. In the Soldiers' Meadow area north of the Black Rock Desert, a squatter took some land and started raising cattle and a family. There was no school, and the squatter hired a man to run his ranch while he took his family to a nearby community that had a school. On returning, the hired man had brought friends with him and refused to give the ranch back to the squatter. There was no law in the area at that time, and the squatter was driven off at gunpoint. Chapter 1.
I know my brand when I see it, and those are my cattle in that sales pen. How did you get them? Why are they there?
Nathaniel Coppersmith, just turned 35 years a week ago, was, in turn, angry, mystified, and fearful seeing 200 head of his cattle in a sales yard in Winnemucca, Nevada.
You know as well as I, Lefty Tom, those are my cattle. They're wearing my brand.
Lefty Tom Atkins owned the Humboldt Stockyards, one of the busiest along the western corridor of the Intercontinental Railroad, and he stood silent for a moment or two, shaking his head full of long curly hair, hat in hand. He pulled a rag from his pants pocket and wiped his face.
"Fact is, Nate," he said as he took a deep breath and wiped his brow again, "that was your brand, and those were your cattle. The man what drove those steers in had valid papers signed by Reg Chapman himself."
Chapman was the federal land agent for Humboldt County, the agent that handled all the federal Homestead Act legalities and other federal properties. He was known as a stickler for following the letter of the law to its final period.
"There ain't nothing I can do, Nate. I knowed them was your beef when I saw the first one, but them papers told me different."
Just who was it had those so-called papers you're so willing to believe?
Nate Coppersmith had his shoulders all bunched up, his fists of gnarled knuckles ready for action, and Lefty took a step back. Coppersmith homesteaded his 160 acres northwest of Winnemucca 3 years ago, built a nice home for he and his wife Susan, and was willing to spend the rest of his life on that high mountain desert land just a few miles south of the Oregon border. Coppersmith was a big man who nobody could say ever threw his weight around. Well over 6 feet tall and about 200 pounds, narrow at the hips and broad in the chest, the man loved weightlifting contests and got involved in boxing matches at the drop of a hat. There wasn't anyone in Humboldt County who could remember him throwing a punch in anger or threatening to draw a weapon. It just wasn't in him, most would say. But when Lefty Tom looked into his eyes at that moment, he wondered.
Those blazing eyes would skin a coyote with their heat and boil 2 rabbits on the side,
Tom Atkins thought. He didn't want to tell Coppersmith the truth, and knew if he didn't and Nate found out he lied, he'd have to leave the county.
"Why, Curly Joe Simpson, of course. You gave up your homestead, and he took it over, is what Chapman told me."
The truth came as a flash of heat lightning, almost driving Nate Coppersmith to his knees. All at once he understood, and the understanding was terrifying. He needed more than a talk with Agent Chapman. He needed to break out the Sharp's rifle and Colt handguns.
"My good friend Curly Joe Simpson," he muttered. "My ranch foreman, Curly Joe."
Coppersmith stood stock still, slowly shaking his head from side to side. Anger flashed through him like a rampaging torrent, and he knew he had to take hold of it, keep his emotions under control, not go on a rage and tear out walls, destroy buildings, and kill Curly Joe Simpson. He had to control this rage, for Susan's sake, for the children.
Curly Joe Simpson. Therefore, I'm responsible, because it was I who brought him onto the ranch."
He said that so softly that Lefty wasn't sure he really heard it. Nate Coppersmith kicked some dust around, gave the herd of steers wearing his brand a long look, patted Lefty Tom on the shoulder, and walked slowly out of the stockyards. He mounted his horse and walked him back into town to the little home he rented for his family, so his daughter could recuperate from a long illness.
"This all started because I was willing to trust a man so I could make a better life for my wife and children,"
he muttered, walking toward the small cabin south of the railroad tracks. It was a fine spring morning just 18 months ago when Curly Joe Simpson rode into the yard at the Sleepy U, a tired, dusty cowman looking for work.
"Couldn't have picked a better time to show up, Simpson,"
Coppersmith said.
"Not too many want to work this far out."
Simpson had good names and places he talked about, seemed to know his business, and Coppersmith put him to work.
"I'll tell you, Susan, this new man Simpson has 2 friends down in Austin who will come up if we need the hands." "If we need the hands?" he laughed. "We have a fine new crop of calves, and we need the hands. Old Dancing Antelope will sure be glad of the help."
Rocky Rockefeller and slant-eyed Tom O'Neill rode up from the Austin mines a few days later and were put to work right away.
"They aren't really the cowmen they think they are, Susan, but we need the hands. Simpson can throw a fair rope, and that feller they call Slant-Eye rides well. They'll probably hustle out when that first winter storm hits."
Susan Coppersmith liked to feed the crew their morning and evening meals, and the men ate well.
"You fix a fine table, Mrs. Coppersmith,"
Curly Joe Simpson said.
"Is your daughter not feeling well?"
Virginia, Ginny, 6 years old, was not a strong child and seemed to catch every germ that floated through northern Nevada. "She's getting stronger as she gets more age on her," Susan said. That summer was hot and dry, and the small crew Nate Coppersmith had worked hard the whole time. As fall approached, the weather turned cold and wet, and little Ginny seemed to suffer from constant ailments. "I would really like to spend this winter in Winnemucca, Nate. Ginny would be warm and dry. I know it would be a hardship, but I don't think she will live through another winter here." The idea of Susan and Ginny moving to town for the winter became kitchen table talk, and Curly Joe Simpson made it bunkhouse talk with his compatriots as well.
"This job has gotten us what I've been hoping for. There's got to be posters spread all over after those bank jobs in New Mexico and California. Hiding out here and getting paid, too,"
he laughed and said,
"has been perfect and just got better. I have a plan that will make us a lot of money. You remember me telling you about that feller I met, the government big shot? Well, with a little help here and there, we're going to own this place. We need to convince that big dumb rancher to go to Winnemucca with his wife and brat kid."
"Why?" Rockefeller was slow in everything he did, including thinking.
"If he's off the ranch for a certain amount of time, we can claim he abandoned it and his homestead and file on it ourselves."
"That don't make no sense," Rockefeller said.
"It does if we turn right around and sell it,"
Slant-eyed Tom said.
"Isn't that what brought us here in the first place?" "Sure was. That letter I got when we were in Santa Fe."
Simpson was a cock of the walk, dressed in the best he could buy, and with the bank jobs in New Mexico and California, he bought a lot of fancy stuff. Many of his old gang wouldn't ride with him because he stuck out so. Every lawman had descriptions of the rooster.
"Think you can talk Coppersmith into that?"
Slant-eyed Tom thought a ranch like this with a fine herd of beef would bring a good price.
"It would mean spending the winter here, but that's a cozy house, and we'd have plenty of meat to eat. You boys back me up, and we'll be the nicest men on the face of the earth. And yes, sir, We'll be more than happy to take care of your little old ranch and them cows and sheeps so you can keep your pretty girl well for the winter."
Laughter could have been heard clear up at the ranch house if someone stood on the porch. Susan was crying softly, sitting in a large overstuffed chair by the fireplace after Nate told her the sad tale of losing their homestead.
"What will we do?" she finally asked.
"First, I'm going to call on Mr. Chapman at the land office, and then I'm going to ride out to Seamus Doherty's ranch and talk to that old lawman. I'm a peaceable man, Susan, but I'm ready to go to war at this minute. I've never felt this kind of anger and hurt in my life, and I believe I could kill Curly Joe Simpson should I happen into him."
"Oh, Nate, no. No, Nate," she sobbed. "I don't understand what brought all this on."
"Greed and a disdain for doing what's right."
Coppersmith shoved his battered old hat down, slipped into a heavy blanket coat, and walked out.
"Chapman better have some good reasons for this. I'll be home for supper, and in the morning I'm riding to Doherty's."
Susan was sobbing, holding her 6-year-old daughter Ginny tight to her as she listened to him ride off to see the land agent. Frail little Ginny, so small for her 6 years, was susceptible to every disease known to inhabit winter weather. Susan held the whimpering child in her arms and carried her to her bed.
"Your papa will get this straightened out, I'm sure. That Mr. Simpson seemed so willing to help, to take care of the ranch while we get you well. There must be some kind of mistake."
"You're damn right I'm angry,"
Coppersmith said, standing in front of Reginald Chapman's heavy oak desk in an office building just half a block from the Humboldt County Courthouse.
"I want an answer, and I mean right now."
"It's rather simple, Mr. Coppersmith,"
Chapman said. He was a thin man, had thinning hair and no facial hair, pale complexion, pale eyes, and was incapable of smiling. At 5 feet and 6 inches, he would have been looking at Coppersmith's belt if the two were standing together.
"The Homestead Act is precise in what is required, and you didn't follow the rules. You abandoned your homestead, Mr. Coppersmith. Plain and simply, you have forfeited your claim to that land."
He wore a smug look, all but saying, "You're a fool." He sat behind his massive oak desk, drumming his fingers on the highly polished wood, reached for a cheroot, and took more time than necessary getting it lit. Prissy is the first word that came to Coppersmith's mind, and he knew he could pick the man up and simply fling him through the large windows that looked down on the well-kept courthouse property.
Smug little bastard was given lies by Curly Joe, and I'm going to have to prove that. I see what has happened, and I know I need help. I abandoned nothing, Mr. Chapman. My daughter was very ill. It was the middle of winter, and I put my ranch foreman in charge until I could return, then brought my family to Winnemucca for the duration.
"That isn't what Joseph Simpson told me. He said you simply rode off and left the place. He never received any word from you in more than 8 months and believed you had abandoned the property. By law, he filed to recover the claim."
"Liar!"
Nate Coppersmith stormed.
"I rode out there several times to give instructions for winter feeding, for spring birthing, for summer grazing. He lied, Chapman."
"If you have any proof of that, bring it to my attention, Mr. Coppersmith."
The prim and proper little man sat back in his chair, gave his fingernails a good looking over, which indicated the conversation was ended.
"Until then, that homestead belongs to Mr. Simpson. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other business to attend to."
"Proof!"
Coppersmith stormed again.
"What kind of proof?"
"Did you write out your instructions to Mr. Simpson? Give him directions in writing? You say you visited him. He says you rode off, and he's not seen you since."
"Bah! You've not heard the last from me, Chapman. That's my homestead, and you know damn well Curly Joe Simpson is stealing it.
Chapman simply waved him off, and Coppersmith fled the office, growling like a mad dog in his rage. The thought didn't enter his mind until he was almost home.
What did Curly Joe Simpson offer this puny little land agent? Are the two of them in this together? Get me off the place, sell off the market steers, and then sell the place. I've got to see Seamus Doherty as soon as I can get up there.
It was just 18 months ago that Simpson had ridden on to Coppersmith's ranch, not long after the battles the Army had with the Bannock tribes in the area. Coppersmith's place had been hit twice by rampaging Indians. He'd lost buckaroos and cattle, but the buildings and his family survived. Little Ginny caught some kind of illness that fall. A major winter was developing, and Susan wanted Nate to bring the family to Winnemucca for the winter. Simpson made him aware that with his extensive background in ranching, that he could keep the ranch safe, and Nate took the bait like a hungry carp.
I've never been this humiliated in my life, Susan,
he said when he got home from the meeting with the land agent. He had come straight back to their little rented cabin, despite the fact he wanted to stop again at the stockyards.
To think I was helping my family, and what I did was give away everything we've worked for. Maybe I should talk with Sheriff Peters before I ride up to Doherty's place.
Don't forget he blames you for being all stove up, Nate. You might not get much help from him.
I told him not to get off his horse to tend that calf until I put a loop on the big mama cow. He was always so arrogant, so willing to not listen to anyone. Oh no, don't listen to the boss man. And sure enough, that heifer whooped on him bad, tore up my horse while I tried to get to him. Damn fool.
Maybe today isn't the right time to talk to Ephraim, Nate. Let's have a nice supper with the children, and you can ride north to Paradise Valley tomorrow and spend some time with Mr. Doherty. He's a wise old man, Nate, and he's been a good friend for a long time.
You're right, Susan. I'd probably shoot old Ephraim Peters the first time he mocked me. He never was a very good cowman, and he's not much as a sheriff either.
They had to chuckle at his comment, and Susan called the children for supper. Their oldest son, Sam, was 8 years old, and would be a big man like his father, and baby Ralph, now 4, never slowed down, whether moving, talking, or eating. Sam was wise for his young age, had heard much of what Nate and Susan talked about.
I'll help you get our ranch back, Papa. I can help.
I know you can, son. I might just need your help, too.
He ruffled the boy's thick hair and chucked him gently under his chin.
I must have been a mighty soft touch to Curly Joe Simpson and those friends of his. But someone a lot smarter than Simpson has to be behind all this.
Chapter 2.
This is going to be a fine time, Seamus. How long has it been that we've had a bottle of the old home sitting between us?
Terence Corcoran had left his badge on his desk in Eureka, Nevada, the week before, taking some time off from chasing bad guys and making a long trek northward to the Paradise Valley of Humboldt County after getting a letter from an old family friend.
Don't be putting the old blarney to your talk, Corcoran,
Seamus Doherty said with a gentle laugh.
You've never put a foot in Ireland, have no natural brogue, and wouldn't know a real Irish spud if it spoke to you.
He sat back in a heavy timbered chair covered in cowhide that had been laced into place, and laughed right out loud. Doherty had quit his job with Wells Fargo as a railroad detective for the life he had now. He'd been on this big cattle ranch in the Paradise Valley of northern Humboldt County for many years. The Doherty family had emigrated with the Corcoran clan on the same ship, but Seamus Doherty was 10 years old at the time, and Corcoran hadn't been born until the ship was at sea for several days.
Your letter said that antelope are fat and sassy, and the mule deer are begging to be shot, and I'm here because of that, Corcoran said.
He lifted his glass of fine Kentucky bourbon, approved of its color and aroma, and took it down in one swallow.
That's a fine, mellow taste, that is. I rode through a ranch full of Herefords, Seamus. All of those yours?
Many have my brand, Terence. This is fine cattle country. You need to give up this life of yours, carrying a badge and chasing outlaws, buy a fine spread, find a lovely lass, and settle down. Of course, she'd have to be blind if she pecked you, he chuckled. Then you two could have 12 kids, 1,000 head of cattle, and a quiet life.
Humboldt County was large even by Western standards, and the Paradise Valley was about 40 miles or so north of the county seat, Winnemucca. Its western edge was the lofty Santa Rosa Mountains, from which cold streams and creeks, teeming with trout, watered the valley. Ranches, great and small, dotted the area. A small community existed, and the ranches raised cattle, sheep, grasses, and grains.
Ha!
Corcoran laughed right out at the comment.
I wouldn't last a week, old man. Now, the finding of a lovely lass I'll go along with. Marrying her and raising 12 children I won't abide. Don't tell anyone, Seamus, but I don't even know how to throw a lariat.
He laughed right out again and whopped Doherty across the shoulders.
No, old man, I'll carry my little tin star, put fear in the hearts of bad men, and chase after a wench or two should I run into them. After all, Seamus, isn't that what you did for so many years?
Seamus Doherty smiled and nodded, remembering all those years traveling from Dodge City to San Francisco or south to Santa Fe, protecting trainload after trainload of gold, banknotes, and personal property, and catching bad men as often as possible. He also remembered how good it felt to hang up the gun belt and take off the badge. The two men were sitting in the large great room at Seamus Doherty's ranch, a blazing fire chasing off an early winter or late fall storm, waiting for Mrs. Doherty, Megan by name, to call them for supper. The fireplace was built with native river rock, the house built with native timber that Doherty had cut and notched himself. There were steer horns mounted over the fireplace, a buffalo head and a couple of antelope heads mounted on the walls, and a great bear skin slung over the back of the leather-covered sofa Corcoran was sitting on.
It feels comfortable, Seamus, I have to say that, but it just wouldn't work for me. I need to ramble about. You know, this job in Eureka is the longest I've ever worked for one man in my life. Must be getting old.
He laughed. Corcoran was long and strong, had reddish-gold hair that hung in waves and curls, a massive walrus mustache that he took great care of, and sparkling bright green eyes that drove the women mad. Corcoran could be serious when it mattered, but more often than not he would be found with a grand smile, a wry smile, or just a crooked grin, probably thinking of some way to get in trouble. He was in his late 30s, but acted more like a young buck out on a toot, chasing the elephant. Those close to the lawman knew he enjoyed a party almost as much as he enjoyed a good knock-'em-down fistfight. He could draw his Colt with lightning speed, but told anyone willing to listen that hitting the target is more important than a fast draw.
Heard the Bannocks were raising lots of dust up this way, Seamus. Still a problem?
Army buys at Fort McDermott got 'em quieted down some. Got some help from the local tribes and that helped. Most of the trouble was northwest of us, up along the Oregon border and down into the Black Rock Desert. Bannock's got some help from the Pitt River tribe and from the western Shoshone. It was fierce for a while, but things are back to normal now.
Corcoran snorted a bit at that, wondering if there was such a thing as normal.
Normal, eh? He said. That's a far-fetched idea, Seamus. But I think I know what it is you're trying to say. Would Indian trouble, cattle rustling, stagecoach robberies, along with murder and mayhem be considered normal?
They had to laugh at the thought. Megan Doherty walked into the great room and the men jumped to their feet. She was tall, statuesque, and gorgeous.
I think it's time to put away the tall tales, boys, and join me for some supper.
Her long red hair hung in great waves, her eyes so green they blazed, and her smile lit the northern skies, was the way Seamus described his lovely wife.
Seamus cut some steaks from a beef's ribs yesterday, Terence. You might not need that knife you carry,
she joked, leading them into a grand kitchen. It was at least 40 feet in every direction, with a massive cast-iron cook stove, large carving and preparing counters, and a heavy oak table in the center of the room. There was room for at least 8 people at the table, maybe 10 if crowded just a bit. Seamus took an end seat with Megan to his left and Terence to his right.
"Usually we'll have some of the crew with us for supper," Seamus said. "The gang of them are off bringing the last of the strays down from Summer Range. We'll take the bunch of them to the feedlot next week."
Supper was filled with talk of the old days when Terence was a boy and Seamus was ready to head west. Talk about Megan arriving in San Francisco and meeting this huge monster of a Wells Fargo detective after having her possessions stolen. The lamps burned late and didn't come back on too early the next morning.
"We'll pack the mules after a good breakfast, Terence. I think I'll need more than just coffee to get my head out of the fog that's rolled in."
Megan had platters of bacon and griddle cakes with fresh churned butter and molasses on the table, and a pot of coffee boiling on the stove.
"Hope old man Winter holds off for a week, Seamus. I'm looking forward to just living out of a deer camp and riding through these beautiful mountains you have here."
Paradise Valley sat at the eastern base of the Santa Rosa Mountains, about 40 miles or so north of Winnemucca. Rocky and cut deep with canyons, covered with a hefty blanket of snow in the winter that fed rich ranch land in the valley, the mountains teemed with big game and game birds. Grasses in the valley were deep and lush, allowing for ample grazing or cutting for winter feed.
"We'll need it to be a bit on the cold side, Terence. Gets the buck deer and bull elk excited about finding the girls, you know. Makes them a little easier to find."
He laughed.
"Last fall, Megan shot 3 deer and 2 antelope for some fine winter meat, and I managed to down 2 quail. Don't challenge that woman, Terence. You could have outshot Doc Holliday any day of the week."
"Well, maybe Holliday. He couldn't hit the broadside of a fat mule. But could she outshoot Bill Cody?"
All Seamus Doherty did was smile and nod, getting a giggle from Megan. "Let's move, boys," Megan said. "Don't get started on your stories until we're in a good camp high on a rocky ridge." She stopped talking suddenly and cocked her head to listen. "Sounds like someone coming up the road, Seamus." The 3 of them walked to the front door to see who would be calling this early in the morning. "Why, my goodness and all that," Megan Doherty said. "It's Nate Coppersmith." She waved, and the 3 stepped off the veranda-style front porch to welcome their visitor. Chapter 3.
"This is one of the sweetest deals you've ever come up with, Curly. But how long is it going to last?"
Slant-eyed Tom sat on the porch of the Sleepy U Ranch north of the Pueblo Valley. Until just 3 weeks ago, the ranch had been owned by Nathaniel Coppersmith and his wife Susan. The same argument had taken place several times over the last several days, with Curly Joe Simpson getting more and more angry. Simpson was the type of man who wouldn't tolerate another challenging his position of leadership. In this case, leadership over a 3-man gang of ruthless murderers, cutthroats, and thieves. To question Simpson was a sign of disrespect that simply wouldn't be tolerated. Slant-eyed Tom was there the night Simpson shot his favorite dove in that little border town for asking why he never changed his shirt. Rockefeller laughed and said it was so dirty he couldn't take it off, which made the girl laugh for the last time in her life. Interestingly, ever since that episode, Curly Joe Simpson has never been seen in anything but clean, rather fancy clothing.
"I'm just saying your plan worked perfectly, Curly Joe. How much longer can this last?" "How many times are you going to ask that? It'll last as long as we will,"
he stormed. His eyes narrowed down, His jaw tightened, and he...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?